Good morning, friends. Let's begin our satsang with a chant by Yogananda ji. सरिता सरिता चंचल चंचल सागर सागर गंभीर है सागर सागर गंभीर है हे हरि सुंदर हे हरि सुंदर हे हरि सुंदर हे हरि सुंदर तेरे चरण पर सिर नमः तेरे चरण पर दुखी जना के वेदन वेदन योगी जना के आनंद है योगी जना के आनंद है योगी जना के आनंद है हरि सुंदर हे हरि सुंदर हे हरि सुंदर हे हरि सुंदर तेरे चरण पर तेरे चरण पर सिर नमः Oh God beautiful Oh God beautiful Oh God beautiful Oh God beautiful at thy feet oh I do bow at thy feet oh I do bow Oh God beautiful Oh God beautiful Oh God beautiful in the forest thou art green in the forest thou art green in the mountains thou art high in the mountains thou art high in the river thou art restless in the river thou art restless in the ocean thou art grave in the ocean thou art grave oh God beautiful oh God beautiful oh God beautiful oh God beautiful at thy feet oh I do bow at thy feet oh I do bow Let's meditate for a brief moment now, taking the words of the chant inward. Good morning, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Essence of the Bhagavad Gita. This morning, I've been thinking about the words to pick, and I'm going to do something unusual, different from what I've been doing, not unusual in that sense, because I'm going to move on to chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita. And I was thinking about this, and I don't think I'm going to pick one verse of chapter 10, because this entire chapter has a recurring thread or a theme. I know my time is rather short, but still I'm going to try and speak about this entire chapter of the Gita, or at least introduce it. I'll see if I want to come back to it next week and say anything more. This chapter is rather interesting. Both chapter 10 and chapter 11 of the Gita, they are different from the other chapters. There is not really a philosophical narrative that Krishna is carrying through with Arjuna. They are more vibrational. That's how I feel both these chapters. So I'm not even going to read any of the Sanskrit verses today because I haven't picked one. I'm going to simply read some of the English verses. And I invite you to tune into the vibrations of what Krishna is sharing with Arjuna, because it is not necessarily a philosophy, not theoretical, not abstract. It is the pure consciousness of the divine that is expressing through Krishna, and he is lifting Arjuna up in these two verses. In chapter 11, Krishna actually gives Arjuna an experience of a high state of samadhi, of cosmic consciousness, of divine itself. And chapter 10 is leading into it, and you sort of feel that scene building up in the story of the Mahabharata as Krishna is speaking with Arjuna. You know, Krishna starts this chapter by describing his own nature. When I say his nature, not Krishna as that person, but the divine nature itself and the divine consciousness. And as he starts speaking, in verse 17 of chapter 10, Arjuna asks this question. Arjuna speaks to Krishna. He says a few things, and then he says, "O Supreme Yogi, how shall I meditate on you? To know you as you are, in what forms and aspects can I accurately think of you?" This is a question that Arjuna poses to Krishna in the middle of chapter 10. And the rest of the verses till the end of chapter 10 are Krishna's response to that question: how shall I meditate on you? How can I know you as you are? In what forms and aspects can I accurately think of you? You know, for those of you who follow Sunday satsangs that we offer here in Palo Alto, a couple of weeks ago, Lakshmi, who's one of the light bearers here, she gave a beautiful sermon, and she shared this story from the Chandogya Upanishad. And it's one of my favorite stories. You know, the Upanishads are like Zen koans. They have these imageries and examples and stories that beautifully illustrate very esoteric teachings for all of us. And they both have that same uplifted vibration of scripture, but also they intellectually help us understand certain complex principles of the spiritual path. And this story is a conversation between a father and a son. This is how the Chandogya Upanishad begins. This is a conversation between two sages. The son is Shvetaketu, and the father his name is Uddalaka. And Uddalaka himself is a very, very realized high sage. And he sends his son Shvetaketu for training in a Gurukula under the guidance of a guru. And Shvetaketu learns all the scriptures, he learns all these teachings, and he returns back home to his father. And then Uddalaka sees that Shvetaketu is a little proud of himself. He feels that he has learned a lot of things and now he is very smart. So Uddalaka asks Shvetaketu, have you received all the knowledge from your guru? And Shvetaketu, yes, of course I have. I have learned all that I've needed to learn. And then Uddalaka says, have you gained knowledge of the unknowable? Have you learned to perceive that which cannot be perceived? Have you learned to hear that which cannot be heard? And at this point, Shvetaketu himself, being a very wise and realized being, he pauses. He understands that Uddalaka is referring to something that he perhaps does not fully understand, has not realized yet. So he is, out of his own humility, he asks his father, to explain further what it is that he's talking about. And Uddalaka immediately goes on to explain, to impart more knowledge to his son. He talks about the nature of the divine. He talks about that pure consciousness that stands outside of creation and yet manifests itself through creation, how God is the essence of all of creation and yet pervades all of it. He is outside of it and he is in it. He cannot be perceived and yet he is perceived. He cannot be known and yet he can be known. It is just one of those ironies of the spiritual path. That's how I call it a Zen koan when I started describing the story. And then Uddalaka goes on to give two examples to Shvetaketu. First, he asks Shvetaketu to bring a fruit. And Shvetaketu brings a fruit. And in fact, in the Upanishad, he asks Shvetaketu to bring a fruit of a banyan tree. And many of you may not have seen the fruit of a banyan tree. You can imagine a fig. It's very similar. I was thinking about it last night. It's a very small fruit, which is sort of mushy inside. And there's like hundreds of seeds in one fruit. The seeds, it's not like a mango or a jackfruit or something where there's an actual pit and a hard seed inside, just like hundreds of tiny seeds like mustard. And he asks Shvetaketu to bring this fruit, and then he asks him to open it, and he does. And then he sees all these seeds. And then Uddalaka asks, what do you see? And he says, I see all the seeds. And then he says, take one seed, which is actually very tiny, it's tinier than a mustard seed. And then he says, break open that seed. And Shvetaketu does that. And then he says, what do you see now? And he says, nothing, because it's obviously already a tiny seed. You cannot see anything that is inside that seed. And then his father Uddalaka says, but the new tree is inside the seed. That life that creates a banyan tree, it's such almost one of those ironies in creation. The banyan tree is said to be one of the biggest trees. If you've seen one, I think they're rather common in India. I don't think they grow in the West. I don't think I've seen one. It's probably very tropical. It's a huge tree. It can live for hundreds of years. And it has these root systems that come from the branches and go back into the soil. It's just a vision to behold. And then he says that tree is coming from that seed. Somehow that tree is contained in here, but you cannot see it. And he says that's what God is. That force of creation is present within the tiniest of seed, but it cannot be seen with your eyes. It cannot be perceived in that way. But if you knew, you would know that that seed has that potential in it. You would know, a man of realization would know that God is present in every atom. And then he gives one more example. He asks Shvetaketu to bring a handful of salt and a bowl of water. And he asks him to dissolve that salt in that bowl of water. And Shvetaketu does that. And then now Uddalaka says, do you see the salt? Can you show me the salt in the water? And Shvetaketu says, no, I cannot. I cannot see the water. I cannot show you. Sorry, I cannot see the salt. Neither can I show you. And then he says, now taste a drop of this water. And then he does that. And Uddalaka asks, what do you taste? And Shvetaketu says, I taste salt. And then it's already clear. If I don't even have to explain. That's the essence of the divine. The divine consciousness pervades creation. It cannot be seen through the senses. It cannot be perceived in that same way. But when we are able to experience, when we are able to taste the essence, we do feel it. We do feel that divine presence. And of course, the rest of the Chandogya Upanishad is very philosophical and abstract, where Uddalaka explains the nature of this universe, the nature of creation, and the nature of the divine to his son Shvetaketu. And I was thinking of that example and that story because that's essentially the conversation between Arjuna and Krishna, where Arjuna is asking, how can I know you? How can I know the divine? And Krishna is going to describe to Arjuna now all the aspects of the divine, not in any limited fashion, but as the essence, that which is within and inside every atom of creation, that which is abstract and yet that which can be experienced. There is a line in Yoganandaji's Gita commentary. I say Yogananda, I mean, of course, this book is written by Swami Kriyananda, but it is Yoganandaji's commentary. But I think these lines are actually from Master's original writings as well. I might have shared this. I believe this was in chapter 7 of the Gita when I spoke about those verses. And I recently reread that for another webinar that I recorded for the Kriya Yoga series. If you haven't seen that, you can I talk more about this line in that series as well. This line from chapter 7 of the Gita commentary, where Yoganandaji says, God's presence can only be inferred on the physical plane. God's presence can be felt on the astral plane, and God's presence is intuitively known and perceived on the causal plane. And I've been thinking about that, of what Yoganandaji was talking about. He says on the physical plane, God's presence can only be inferred, which means that direct perception through the senses is not possible. We cannot grasp the divine with our eyes, with our ears, the way we can understand the material world, but yet we can infer. And when we are able to tune energetically, when we are able to tune into our hearts, we are more in tune with that astral plane, then God's presence can actually be felt. And when we are even further deeper in our own astral spine, when we are able to touch upon that causal plane, then we can intuitively know or perceive God's presence as that idea behind all of creation. And again, I mentioned that right now in this context because that's what Krishna is going to describe to us, how God's presence can be inferred and felt. And let me read a few verses. Even before I start reading verses, I also want to share this example that somebody gave me. It might have been Asha, or I think it must have been actually Swami Kriyananda. She was probably quoting him. And I almost feel that it might have even been from one of Swami Kriyananda's books, when somebody asked Swamiji for a conception of God, almost wondering, how do I understand or define God? How do I think of God? I don't believe in this, I don't believe in this religion or that, or in this particular form of the divine or that. And then Swamiji says, think of God as your own highest potential, the best version of yourself. And that, I thought, was a very interesting way of looking at it. And now, as I was reading all these verses from the Gita, it comes to me as that ultimate truth, because God cannot be perceived, but also we know God because God is that highest potential that is within ourselves. This three-letter word in English is so interesting. If you think about it, it's so random. I say God and you hear something, and I'm thinking of a woman with 4 hands, you're thinking of an old man with a long beard, somebody else is thinking of something else. It's one of those things which words are symbols. Meaning is pasted upon them through human experience. So when I throw out a symbol, you are pasting upon it your own experience. And that's true even with the word God. We all paste upon this word our own individual human experience. And it's different for each one of us. And God is truly that highest potential. But we all seek, we all perceive, we all aspire toward it in our own individual ways. And that's why every single soul's spiritual path is its own unique journey. There's no two identical souls in this universe. There's no two identical atoms in this universe. Anyway, let me start by reading some verses that are Krishna's response. Again, as I said, the reason why I decided to do this morning in this particular fashion without actually explaining or going into depth with any of the verses, because I do strongly feel a lot of these verses in chapter 10 and chapter 11 are purely vibrational. So tune into these as I read some of these verses. The Blessed Lord said, O best of Princess Arjuna, I shall willingly relate to you something of my manifestation. But I will relate only those which are outstanding, for of my variety there is no end. Now Krishna is describing the nature of the infinite to Arjuna. I am the true self dwelling in the heart of all creatures. I am the beginning, the continuation, and the end of their existence. Among the Vedic gods, I am Vishnu. I am the luminaries in the sky. Among luminaries in the sky, I am sun. Among the wind gods, I am Marichi, the most beneficial wind. Among luminaries in the night sky, I am the moon. Among the Vedas, I am Samaveda, known for its musical beauty. Among the gods, I am Indra. Of sense perceptions, I am mind, the perceiver. In all creatures, I am intelligence. I'm going to skip a few verses and move on. Well, Among Rudras, or the intelligent life forces, I am Shankara, the empowering intelligence. Among astral abstractions of human desires, which are the Yakshas and the Rakshasas, I am Kubera, the god of wealth. Among the vitalizing forces, Vasus, I am Pavaka, or the fire god. Among mountain peaks, I am Meru, which symbolizes the highest spiritual attainment. Of all priests, I am Brihaspati, the guru of the gods. Among generals, I am Skanda, the god of war. Among the bodies of water, I am the ocean. Among great rishis, I am Bhrigu. Amongst words, I am the cosmic syllable Om. Among yajnas, or sacrificial rites, I am Japa, or the silent superconscious chant of the divine name. Among unmoving things, I am the Himalayas. Among trees, I am Ashwatha. Among the divine seers, I am Narada. Among the Gandharvas, the gods of music, I am Chitraratha. Among perfected beings, I am Kapila, the exponent of Shankya philosophy. A lot of these references may not make sense, even if there are Indians watching this, because of course these are referring to lots of mythology and scriptural references in the Indian system. But I think what Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna in these verses is that he is that perfected state of attainment in every aspect of existence. That's why he is giving these examples. Even if we don't know who Chitraratha is or who Kapila is, you can easily understand among all the things that you see in the day sky, I am the sun. Among all these things that you see in the night sky, I am the moon. God is that perfected. God is perfection itself. I'm going to skip a few verses because there are a lot of scriptural references in these. Among purifiers, I am the wind. Among wielders of weapon, I am Rama. Among aquatic creatures, I am Makara, or the vehicle of the ocean god. Among rivers, I am Ganga, the holiest of all rivers. Among all manifestations, O Arjuna, I am their beginning, middle, and end. Among the various branches of knowledge, I am the wisdom of the self. Among debates, I am the clarity of reasoning. Among all letters, I am the first letter in the alphabet. Among compounds, I am the connector. He's talking about grammar and language. In time, I am the immutable. In creation, I am omnipresent. And I turn my face in all directions, which means God is not facing north or east or south or west. He is equally present in all directions. For energetic reasons, we tune into the east direction because that's how our energies are drawn up. Among the all-dissolving death, I am all-dissolving death. I am birth. I am the origin of things yet to be. Among feminine manifestations, I am Prakriti, or Mother Nature. I am fame, success, the illuminating power of speech, memory, intuitive discrimination, firmness in loyalty, and patience. Among hymns, I am Brihatsaman. Among poetic meters, I am Gayatri. Among months, I am Margasrisha. This is the month that falls between mid-December and mid-January. I think in one of the classes I gave during that time, I was referring to this verse from the Gita, because that is the most perfect of months, because we are most attuned to subtler planes and to our own higher energies. Among seasons, I am the flower bearer, spring. Among deceivers, I am gambling. Of the glorious, I am glory. For those who strive to win, I am victory. Among the good, I am sattva. I am their goodness. It is so beautiful to just appreciate even the poetry of these verses. And this is one of my favorite examples. I don't even know if I should call favorite, but it's one that always intrigues me to meditate on or to think about. Among deceivers, I'm gambling. I think about that because in the Indian scriptures, gambling is considered one of the most delusion-producing deeds. It's one of those things that affirm delusion. It's interesting to even think about, because you would think of a lot of sinful acts as affirming delusion. You could even think of as, promiscuity or alcohol or things like that. But of all things, the Vedas and all the Indian scriptures says gambling is the most delusion affirming. And you think of gambling as something inane. I would bet on this, I'll bet on that. It doesn't seem like it has some kind of far-reaching consequence to our own soul. But for some reason, which I might be beyond my own wisdom to expound, gambling is considered one of the most delusion-affirming things. And in the story of the Mahabharata, for those of you who know, that act of gambling is what really, really turns the tides, and it causes the entire war. It really pulls the Pandava brothers, the spiritual qualities, to the absolute depths of their own despair. And it pushes them and makes them lose everything that they own and everything they had. And of course, gambling could also be seen symbolically, because this act of gambling is our constant temptation to barter with the material plane, to barter with Satan, for lack of a better word, to barter with Maya, to always try to push the boundaries. How bad can I be? Can I do this and yet hold on to my spiritual path? Can I be happy while also pursuing these material desires? That attitude itself can be certainly conceived or seen as gambling. But also even the act of gambling is somehow considered very delusion affirming. And what's fascinating about this verse is Krishna is telling Arjuna, of deceivers and gambling, I'm also that aspect of Maya which is the most Maya producing. Isn't that even interesting to think about when you think of God? When you think of God, you obviously think of only the positive and the uplifting qualities. But also Krishna is saying, I am that which makes everything that it is. I am the essence of all things. And that's why of all the deceivers, I am gambling. I am the most delusion producing of even the deceptive agencies. Of the glorious, I am glory. For those who strive to win, I am victory. And among the good, I am their goodness. You see, that's how we perceive divine. That's the only way to know the unknowable, is to understand it as the essence of being, because that goodness is not ours. That love itself that we share is not ours. That victory that we are seeking is not ours. This is all a vibration that is pulling us, that is drawing us in a direction, and that highest vibration is God. That's what Krishna is explaining to Arjuna. He is that highest potential of all things in creation. I'll skip a few verses here. I am the rod of discipline. I am the skill of the victorious. I am the silence of hidden things. Among the knowers, I am wisdom. Whatsoever constitutes the reproductive seed of all beings, that I am. There is nothing, O Arjuna, moving or unmoving, that exists apart from me. O Arjuna, the manifestations of my divine attributes are without limit. This brief declaration of them merely hints at them. Whatever being is endowed with power, prosperity, or glory, know that endowment itself to be only a spark of my effulgence. I'll read that again. Whatever being is endowed with power, prosperity, or glory, know that the endowment itself to be only a spark of my effulgence. What need you, Arjuna? For these manifold details, know this only: I am the unchanging and everlasting, permeate and sustain the entire cosmos, but with a fragment of my essential being. That's how the 10th chapter of the Gita ends. Like I said, these verses in the Gita, they're so uplifting even to hear and to meditate on. So I hope you found this inspiring. I hope you're inspired to open the Gita and perhaps read some of these verses. I certainly was deeply inspired meditating on and thinking about some of these verses from chapter 10. So I'll see you all again, I think most likely with chapter 11 of the Gita, which is by far the most uplifting of all scriptures, I might even say, and certainly the most uplifting portion of the Gita itself. So until then, God bless you all. See you next week.